So I want to read the portion of the resurrection narrative where we see Thomas, one of the 12 disciples, who is famously known in literary and religious circles as Doubting Thomas, because he wasn't with the disciples originally. They went and reported the resurrection to him, and he doubted. John 20, 24 to 31. Now Thomas, one of the 12 called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Doubt is a very good thing. And why do I say that? Doubt is at the center of what it means to be created in the image of God. We have a Havanese dog. His name is Leo. He's adorable. I'm not just biased. Everybody says so. If you were to see him, you would be moved. But Leo, he never doubts. He acts on instinct. He doesn't ponder. He doesn't question. And that's one of the things beautiful about him, because he thinks we're perfect. So he always loves us. But human beings are different. Human beings are designed by God to think, to evaluate, to question. And why is that? That's because these are faculties that are required to fulfill what God has given the human race to do, to subdue the earth, to image God as God is creator, to image God as being creative, not from nothing as God is able to do, but to take what God has given and to multiply it, to organize it, to make it fruitful, to make it beautiful. One of the wonderful things about having a church in Midtown proper, in this area north of Rockefeller Center to Central Park South, is it is a center of creative activity. And at City on a Hill, we want to really recognize the humanity of that, the divinely given humanity of creative work. And doubt is right at the center of that. Because if there was no doubt, there would be no progress. Progress occurs when people doubt the way things are currently happening. Couldn't this be done a better way? And therefore, doubt is essential. There's a little book called A History of Doubt by an author named Jennifer Hecht. And she wants to celebrate doubt and recognize something that I've just said, which is that doubt is essential to being a human being and is essential to progress. And that oftentimes when we think about people who initiated great things in history, we think about them in retrospect with what they accomplished, but we don't realize that it arose from a place of doubt. Now, as she goes through her narrative on the history of doubt, she even says that doubt has a positive place in religion in a sense, or at least religion in Christianity has accommodated doubt. So you have famous figures who doubted. Job, for example, questions God. He doubts. In the history, he's a biblical figure. In the history of the church, Martin Luther questioned what was happening with the Roman Catholic Church. He dared to doubt. Thomas here doubts. And Hecht says that doubt is so universal that religion must accommodate doubt, and she gives a fairly positive role. for doubt within the context of religion. And then she turns to science and she says, but science, this is the land of doubt. Science is all about doubt. And science advances purely through doubt. But I think although I appreciate how positive she is when she speaks about the way that religion can accommodate doubt, she also points out some things that where the church has made it difficult for people who were questioning and doubting. We can think of the big examples of that, people like Galileo. But on a more local level, more personal level, many of us have been part of communities that did not welcome doubts, that didn't welcome questioning, that did not welcome our questions, but in fact questioned why we may have had questions. And sadly, that's been many people's experience with communities of faith. And I think that this passage that we have is so important here because we know in John's gospel, in the last part of this passage, that Jesus did many, many, many things in the presence of his disciples. What's captured for us here is just a small portion of everything that Jesus did. And yet it was important to Jesus and the Holy Spirit to capture this episode with Thomas. Right after the greatest demonstration of the work of God to date in human history, the resurrection, right after that, one of the people closest to Jesus and closest to the apostles is frontlined with quite a bit of attention, saying, there's one who doubts. There's one who doesn't believe. And Thomas, of course, over time, he does come to believe. But when he expresses his disbelief, he is not cast out by the disciples. It's interesting that the letter of Jude, written, which we read from in the call and response time, this is a little New Testament letter that is especially known for how strident and how encouraging and how rigorous it is in maintaining Orthodox Christian doctrine and resisting false teaching. And it's in this context, though, it's in this context that Jude says, have mercy on those who doubt. And it's right in this very place where the organized church so often fails, to make a confused situation occur where if we're going to be for robust truth as an organized church, we're somehow not going to be for embracing and being merciful to people who doubt. The church has so often failed people right at that particular spot. But the disciples don't fail Thomas at this spot. They don't kick him out. You're no longer a disciple because you didn't believe as we testify, because you want to know more. Jesus doesn't kick Thomas out for his doubts. He welcomes him. He meets him right where his doubt is. Thomas wanted to touch and feel the risen Christ. He wanted proof that he had survived this horrendous death of a crucifixion. And Jesus welcomes this. That's very powerful. It's not only about Thomas, it's to give us an indication of the disposition of Jesus Christ to those who doubt, but are willing to persevere with their doubts. They're willing to explore. And when Jesus says to Thomas, blessed are you, when Jesus says to Thomas, do not disbelieve but believe, and then he comes back and he says, have you believed because you have seen me? But yes, you have. He said, blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed. When Jesus says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed, I think he's saying there will be many who will have doubts. And it will be in working through their own doubts that they too will come to faith. They're not going to be able to do it the way that Thomas does it. But that doesn't mean, and this is key, you may be sitting there saying, oh, I wish I could have been there and touched the risen Christ in his wounds. But this doesn't mean that the blessing won't be as real for you if you too take your doubts to Jesus. He won't lead you to touch him physically, but he will lead you to him personally, just as really and just as truly as Thomas. Now, how is it, and this is what we wanted to focus on this particular sermon, as an application of what it means to be merciful to those who doubt as a church, and as an application of how we see Jesus engaging with Thomas here. In the brief time that we had, I just want to consider 3 ways that we can take our doubts to God. The first thing is that we should pursue our doubts in relationship to God. Pursue doubt in relationship to God. We opened this service with a call and response from Psalm 13. And in Psalm 13, and there's a number of psalms like this, where the psalmist is struggling with doubt. In this case, the psalmist is struggling, if you turn back there, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? You know, the psalmist here didn't see the Messiah as Thomas saw the Messiah. We don't see the Messiah as Thomas saw the Messiah. But here the psalmist is calling out to God. It's saying, where are you? I don't feel your presence the way I would like to feel your presence. As this psalm unfolds, it lands in this positive place in the end. I sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. And so the example here is go to God honestly with your doubts. Bear with him in relationship to him. And he will in time resolve that tension with you in some way. And this is the key difference between a sort of a positive embracing of doubt and a negative embracing of doubt. And that is to say that doubt is not something to be excluded from our relationship with God. But doubt, trying to exercise it on your own, is not healthy, is very risky, and isn't really giving God the fair shot that you give everyone else. What do I mean by that, or everything else? The reality of it is that we all live by faith in some way. Think of the things that you have taken by faith. You take by faith so much medical advice. You take by faith simple things like schedules that end up failing you at the MTA, but you take them by faith, right? We take by faith so much historical information. We weren't there. We believe it because we trust it, and it seems that everybody else trusted. Makes sense of how we got where we are, so we take it by faith. Much of science, philosophers would say today, a lot of science doesn't proceed simply by doubt, but it's based on faith as well. It's based on hunches. And a lot of a philosopher named Thomas Kuhn, a very famous philosopher, wrote a book called The Structure and Nature of Scientific Revolutions, where he basically pointed out that science doesn't proceed with the type of objectivity that it's often considered to proceed by. But there's a lot of implicit faith and intuition that drives science. And so therefore, if you have trouble taking your doubts to God and processing them in a relationship with God, when there are many other areas of life in which you do exercise faith, then I would encourage you to pause there and ask, why is it different with God? Doubt your doubts about God. Or rather, ask yourself a question, why is it that I presume I should not take my doubts to God? And be very honest about that. Maybe even write that down. Is it because I don't believe that he exists? Is it because I don't believe the evidence is true? Am I willing to explore that further? Am I willing to tell God himself that I don't believe that he exists? What is it that's keeping you from doubting? That's keeping you from taking your doubts to God? Is it because you've been a part of a community? There was a religious community that did not welcome doubt, or a family that you didn't feel freedom to doubt? Or have you been hurt by people who profess the name of Jesus, and therefore there's really more of an emotional resistance rooted in some other experience to taking your doubts to God? So doubt why it is. Doubt yourself. Be dare to doubt yourself. You know, Jennifer Hecht points out in this book on the history of doubt, and she's not writing from a Christian perspective, the danger of doubt. If you doubt everything, you think you can't know anything, she says it can lead to a certain type of depression and anxiety and deep, deep insecurity. There's something about being a human being that is enriched. Indeed, it's essential if we can exercise some measure of faith and trust. And that's not just true about the world in which we live, it's also true about us as people. We need to be able to believe. And God has created you for a relationship with Him. And so take your doubts in relationship to God. Let Thomas be an example here, but more than that, be encouraged that the relationship that is offered to you in Jesus Christ is one in which He's already demonstrated His love to you. Jesus went to the cross bearing the wrath of God for you, bearing judgment for you, demonstrating God's love for you. And He has all the space in the world flowing from His love for you to come and explore your doubts with Him, to be encouraged by His example to Thomas, that you too can be one of the blessed ones who have not seen and yet have believed. So the first thing is take your doubts in relationship to God and not take your doubts away from God. And then the second thing we've already alluded to, it flows from being in relationship to God, is to have a conversation with God about your doubts. We see this in Psalm 13, where the psalmist actually lays his doubt out before the Lord. I encourage you to have conversation with God in two ways about your doubts. One, in prayer, and especially in something like journaling. Actually write down what your struggles with God are. Ask God to meet you in your doubts and make them very plain, make them very objective. The second aspect of that conversation is listen to God. So make your thoughts tangible for yourself before God by writing them down in conversation with Him, and then listen to God by engaging His Word. Give Jesus a chance to speak to you. Give yourself a chance to receive the blessing of His presence. And see how He meets you just as really and truly as you explore His Word in the places where you doubt, as you explore what evidence there is about His life and His resurrection to alleviate what doubts you have. And just as we all have our own biases and we know what they are, realize that what you've been told about Jesus that may have led to some of your doubts also comes with people who have their own biases. We couldn't, in a sermon like this, possibly, particularly in a short service on an early Sunday morning in Midtown, go through every aspect of doubt. There are some things that are mysterious and will always be mysterious, and we have to be assured by other factors that we can trust God in understanding them. But there are other things people are told that are just plain wrong, and there's just misinformation, and there's actually more to know and learn. So as you go into relationship with God, have conversation with God by making your thoughts tangible before Him, and then let that conversation go the other way and engage Him in His Word, engage what evidence there is that you have not yet explored with an open mind. And then lastly, that leads to community. How is it that we're going to really engage Jesus in His Word and learn about Him? And that is in community. And this is an application for our church and for everyone here. The church, City on the Hill Church, needs to be a place, wants to be a place, I long for it to be a place known for having mercy on those who doubt. So in the way that we have dreamed of doing our ministry here, we want to have times like this that are on Sunday morning where we engage with Scripture and worship and community right here, all in that Sunday morning experience. We want to have a time of prayer in the middle of the week and Bible study for those who are convinced and desire to see the community grow and for other people to be blessed in this relationship with Jesus in Midtown. But then we want to have special events, special short courses, special ways of considering as a community and offering for others, including how people are doubting, things that engage people right where their doubts are. And you may have things like that you would like the church to explore further. Areas where you're doubting, areas where you know your friends have doubt. If you do, bring those to us. We want to be a community known for having mercy on those who doubt. So relationship, conversation, and community. This is how we are to bring our doubts to God. And we do so with expectation and hope and faith. And then you think about Thomas, is of all the disciples, Thomas, according to the history of the church, ends up taking the gospel to the most remote place. He's the disciple who took the gospel to India. The one who initially doubted went to the ends of the earth once persuaded to take the good news of Jesus Christ elsewhere. And I hope that encourages us all today. Your doubts are not measuring what God will do with you. God has plans for you. And the doubts that you have right now, He knows them. He's involved in them. He wants you to flip your perspective of how you're seeing them. Rather than seeing them as something keeping you from God, let them become a doorway to explore a relationship with Him even further.